Ningen Fushin, Adventurers Who Don't Believe in Humanity Will Save the World, is an adaptation of a novel written by Shinta Fuji. This show is animated by Geek Toys, the studio behind Plunderer, in collaboration with Seven. I learned about the manga adaptation of Fuji's work from a video I saw last year, and the concept sounded promising from what was described. Unfortunately, I think this fantasy anime has already squandered the potential of its unique and intriguing premise. Four adventurers decide to form a party together after meeting at a bar one night and sharing stories of how they were betrayed or deceived by someone in their lives. Despite not fully trusting one another, they agree to work together in order to make a living and to continue enjoying the hobbies that they love. These individuals begin tackling jobs as a team known as the Survivors, with a swashbuckler named Nick as their leader. This pop idol Otaku is accompanied by Tiana, a magician obsessed with gambling, Curran, a dragonian that loves food, and Zim, a former priest that enjoys the company of women. As the name of the series implies, they will eventually save the world in spite of their jadedness. Although the first several episodes were enjoyable, this show has been largely disappointing so far. Ningen Fushin's premiere was a solid start to the series that introduces the main characters along with several flashbacks depicting the circumstances that led to their general disillusionment with humanity. Out of the four of them, Curran and Zim definitely got screwed over the worst. Consequently, they were the ones I felt the most sympathetic towards while watching the first episode. Zim's realistic story of being falsely accused of sexual assault was the most impactful due to how messed up his situation was. As for Curran, there's a whole episode dedicated to her backstory that adds some context to certain moments in the previous one. The second episode focused on the group tackling some low-ranked Labrys while dealing with the initial distrust within the party. This episode had a couple good moments between Curran and Tiana that I wish we could get more of with the rest of the main cast going forward. There is a point in the episode where Tiana unleashes a spell that almost hits Curran by accident. Sadly, this is the only situation so far where there is any friction between the Survivors members. That said, there's a nice moment between the girls during the scene where Nick tries to improve the team dynamic and build up some trust by suggesting they tell each other about their capabilities. These particular moments I'm referring to tap into a little of the potential that this series has. At the start of the second episode, Nick tells them that they need to maintain some skepticism while also trying to trust one another. By the beginning of the fourth episode, that bit of mutual cynicism they all had toward each other completely vanished. The group has gotten along very well, and there hasn't been a moment following the incident in the second episode where they started to doubt one another. There doesn't appear to be any weariness between them anymore, despite the series telling us otherwise. Tiana claims that they don't trust each other and that they aren't friends, yet their actions contradict their statements. It's now just become lip service. There hasn't been any indication in these characters' behavior that would suggest that they still lack faith in one another at this point. These were supposed to be characters that have almost lost the ability to wholeheartedly trust another person after what they went through. For things to be going so smoothly between them in what seems like a short period of time is a bit odd and unbelievable to me. It certainly doesn't help that we haven't gotten a lot of scenes with the survivors bonding, exploring, and completing quests together. At the time of me writing the script, the 9th episode is already aired. This show currently seems like a generic slice-of-life fantasy series, with the initial hook not really relevant to the main cast anymore, and the story not progressing in a meaningful way. The survivors are supposed to be a group of adventurers that have lost their faith in humanity, so why don't they act more cautious around people? The closest example to this was a scene in the most recent episode when Zim doesn't let a little girl go near him. This show desperately needs more tense moments like what we got in the second episode with Curran and Tiana. There should be way more internal conflict within the party given what they've all gone through. To be clear, I'm not saying that the author should have simply repeated exactly what he did before over and over again. It would have been easy for a character outside the party to sow the seeds of doubt in any of their members early on. There's a lot that Fuji could have done with this concept, but unfortunately it's been very poorly executed so far. There was the potential for a very unique dynamic to form between Ningen Fushin's main leads at the start of the series. The relationships between Nick and his comrades should have developed a lot slower and their shared disbelief allowed to linger a bit before they became so trusting and friendly with one another. As I alluded to before, I feel as though the author has wasted a great opportunity to do something special with this story and characters. This anime has a lot more more issues apart from its author failing to do anything interesting with its core premise. One problem I believe this show has is with its stalled narrative progression. The story appears to have come to a complete halt, with there being no build-up to anything significant coming down the line. A large chunk of the content past the 4th episode comes across as boring filler, especially the episode focused on Agathe, the idol Nick becomes a fan of. While it was nice seeing certain events from her perspective, this wasn't really needed and I think was ultimately a waste of time. If you went into the series expecting it to have more of an adventure element to it, I can imagine how much of a letdown these last several weeks have been. The math fighting and casino episodes are the worst ones so far. After episode 4, the survivors had to deal with two people from Nick's past, Claudine and Leon. After Nick stops Claudine from scamming some guy, he's confronted by Leon the next day. In order to resolve the conflict between them, Leon challenges him to something called a mathematics bare-knuckle brawl, which was pretty dull to watch. It was basically just Claudine and Curran solving simple math problems, as Nick struggles to fight Leon for the majority of the episode. Fuji should have went with something more engaging than having the girls sitting there doing math problems. Rock, paper, scissors might have been a better alternative than just having the audience watch them write down answers on a sheet of paper. I think that would have been a lot easier to dramatize alongside that lackluster fight. I know there's a strategy aspect to the math part of it, but it's just not interesting at all. Apparently there was a whole arc involving math fights in the manga. I assume that this was also included in the original novel as well. This was one thing that the studio decided to cut that was probably for the best. The next episode, where Leon rampages through a casino in search of Nick, was somehow less engaging than the previous one. Whereas the last episode included a short sequence conveying Claudine's backstory, this one focused heavily on Leon. Their past is only presented to the audience to show that they're similar to Nick's group, but they just went down the wrong path in life. This idea that they were once good people that were wronged by others. I think this sentiment works more in the context of Claudine's past rather than Leon's backstory with his brother. At least she was doing what she felt like she had to do to survive. It honestly felt like the author was trying too hard to suddenly paint Leon as a good person despite his thievery, especially by the end of the episode. This forgettable antagonist didn't deserve as much attention as he's given here. Just like the Agathe episode, this was a wasted time that could have been used in service of fleshing out one of the central characters or building on their existing relationships. Zim definitely needs more time in the spotlight, as the character hasn't been given a lot to do outside of providing minor support in battle. Anyway, two other flaws that have been a detriment to the quality of this show is its mediocre writing and abysmal animation. Throughout the series, Fuji recycles the same lines of dialogue about characters not believing in humanity and wanting to have faith in people. It really stands out in Claudine's final scene in the Japanese dub. Beyond that, the dialogue can be fairly simplistic, and some events often play out in a predictable manner. In the beginning of the series, the overall presentation was actually okay. There were several moments in the first couple episodes where the animation and art were solid. Regrettably, there's a drastic dip in the animation quality in certain episodes. The earliest examples can be found midway through the 3rd episode. For instance, there is a slow-mo scene where Kieran first encounters the Solo Eater entering a restaurant, and his movement is so awkward. There's also a small moment in another scene where Nick is trying some of Curran's food, and one of her dumplings disappears when she moves her hand down. Of course, that is something negligible that some viewers might even miss. Conversely, the next episode has some of the jankiest walking animations I've seen in quite a while, and it's pretty hard not to notice. There's a scene where Nick and his allies are walking down some steps that looked horrible. There was also another scene near the end of the episode with Tiana and Kazuna walking together that looked odd. The math battle episode is by far the worst in terms of animation and contains the most egregious use of CG in the entire series. Geek Toys utilizes CG throughout the show quite often, usually for random background characters or certain objects. It typically doesn't look great and is very noticeable when put alongside the 2D characters. That said, the way the studio chose to implement the CG is so much worse than what they commonly put on display. For the majority of this episode, the crowd watching Nick fight Leon was created using CG. This static group of CG spectators stood out so much that I found myself distracted by how bad it looks the first time I watched this episode. I got the feeling that Geek Toys either couldn't meet their deadline or used up their budget for this episode. You might feel the same way in regards to certain points in other episodes too, but in this case it's it's pretty obvious that they fell short on something. Whether that be money or time, I don't know. Regardless, the fight sequence in this episode really sucked. Nick was just punching air for most of the episode as Leon stalled for time. There were a lot of close-up shots of Nick punching and wide shots of his opponent dodging and retreating. The animation was very limited. This was one of the most bland action sequences in the entire show. The fight scenes in the series are generally serviceable at best, and to be clear, there are moments when the animation looks fine. However, when the quality drops and things start looking rough, it really brings this anime down in addition to the problems I mentioned before. As of right now, I cannot recommend checking out Ningen Fushin. There are much better fantasy anime airing this season that are more deserving of your time. The only thing the series has going for it now is its likable main cast. I have my doubts that this show will improve in its final few episodes, but I hope that the studio can prove me wrong. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about this anime so far, and as always, thanks for watching.